After the checkmate Putin did on Zelensky, he proposed for the plans and the negotiations to go back to Istanbul, back to 2022, where they left off. This all started when the coalition of the willing, or Zelensky's supervisors, came to Kiev and they decided to have a little witty action going on Putin, trying to checkmate Russia. And they made a bold offer for Russia to have a 30-day ceasefire. If Russia wants to stop the war and is serious about having a ceasefire, they said, then they proposed a 30-day ceasefire. And part of the reason why they did this, why the European leaders and Zelensky offered this ceasefire, is to drag Putin into confrontation with Trump, so they could bring back Trump into their side forever for good, and then they could keep on getting more US money and weapons so they could keep on supplying more weapons for Ukrainian war, and the war would just continue. This was a tricky step that Macron, Poland, and the other EU members were uh, doing in order to put a trap on Putin and also to bring Trump and get him more involved into this war. Now, of course, Trump doesn't want to get more involved into this war because the war and the objectives for US in the Ukraine project are basically done. US ended up taking over most of Ukrainian resources for now anyways, whatever Russia hasn't taken. So they don't need much more besides the war to end, so Russia doesn't get more territory, because as the war continues more and more and more, Russia will end up taking more and more territory, and US realizes this. US knows this is going to happen, where Ukrainian forces are now crumbling, Russia is taking more towns, and the time is not on Ukrainian side. Although US can supply them with weapons and protract the war and make it bloodier, but the end result is going to be more casualties on both sides, more land Russia will end up taking over, and who knows what's going to happen anyways with Ukraine. So the problem with this is Ukraine is putting on the line its whole nation. Russia is putting on the line resources to take over whatever he wants. US is taking on the line resources in terms of weapons and money, and EU is actually putting on the line a lot more than US, because EU now is starting to disintegrate, where Romania is getting Simon guy, that's a MAGA guy that's probably gonna get elected. We see in Serbia Vucic standing up against EU. We see in Slovakia, we see in Hungary, and in other places in EU we're seeing an uprising against the EU globalists and the women in pants that are trying to protract a bloody war. And actually, the globalists and their plan was a bigger war with the US direct involvement in this Ukraine Russia conflict, with an eventual US direct war with Russia, where then Russia would be divided in several parts. That was the plan. And that obviously is a crazy plan, but they had this plan which is not going to work right now, as we can see Trump making all kinds of deals. And as soon as Putin came out and said that he's ready to do a direct negotiation with Ukraine in Istanbul and continue from where they stopped in Istanbul, while they take into account the reality on the ground, meaning they've taken more land now, so that land is now Russian and that needs to be accepted by Ukraine, plus all the old things that Ukraine is supposed to accept, meaning no NATO, less military, or the Ukrainian military and the army will have to shrink, uh, and Ukraine would have to basically stay neutral. And now, after 2 years, we have Ukraine giving up more territory. And this is due to the fact that the European allies, so-called coalition of the willing, convinced Zelensky to stop that negotiation and bar himself from doing any negotiation with Putin because they were afraid that he would go and do negotiate with Putin without the EU. That's why they forced Zelensky to put this ban on negotiations with Russia. So the supervisors of Zelensky, who is Macron, Germany, Poland, France, UK, they're not interested in seeing any type of ceasefire. They're interested in protracting this war. But we see Trump making real big moves, and we'll talk about that. But let's look at some news right now. Kremlin issues update on proposed Ukraine peace talks. Moscow is serious about finding a lasting solution, and they say Russia is ready to resume direct peace talks with Ukraine. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said, stressing Moscow is serious and commitment to reaching a lasting settlement. And they go on. However, Ukraine, backed by several European nations, has demanded that Russia agree to a ceasefire first as a precondition for talks. After US President Donald Trump urged Kiev to immediately agree to the proposal for direct unconditional talks, Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky said he would be waiting for Putin in Turkey on Thursday personally. So after that, Trump after Trump coming out and telling him to go to Istanbul, Zelensky capitulated, and he might end up going to Istanbul, but I don't think Putin is going to go there himself. He's most likely going to send Ushakov, his helper and advisor Ushakov, to Istanbul, where he's going to sit down and basically start the capitulation process for Ukraine. This is the only way. And Moscow outlines basis for peace negotiations with Kiev. So here is where it gets interesting. The aborted 2022 Istanbul talks should serve as the starting point to justice for the real situation on the ground. So again, Russia is saying we're going back to the 2022 Istanbul negotiations, and during those negotiations, Russia back in 2022, Russia didn't have the territories it has now. So now Russia is going to demand everything that it was demanding in 2022 plus these new territories that it took over 2 years. So Ukraine is getting a worse deal, and if time goes on, as time goes on, Ukraine is going to get increasingly lesser, worse deal as time goes on. And Ushakov told Russian Channel One that any peace talks with Ukraine should take into account the points that were worked out by the sides during the 2022 negotiations, which Kiev unilaterally walked away. The real situation on the ground should obviously be considered as well, he added. Also, on Sunday, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters that the objectives of negotiations are clear: to eliminate the root causes of the conflict. What are the root causes of the conflict? They are Ukraine wanting to join NATO, and that's probably the main one. And the other one is Ukraine needs to recognize these territories and decrease its army size, stay neutral, and stop their Russophobic tendencies and denazify. So these are the root causes of the conflict that Russia is going to address during these negotiations. And they say the decision is now up to the Ukrainian authorities and their supervisors, the Russian president said. So basically, what Putin did, he checkmated EU and Macron, who were trying to protract the war, set a trap under Putin and Trump. What Putin did was a checkmate. He checkmated them, and Trump obviously was happy, as he wrote on Truth Social, that he jumped and supported Putin because he realizes what's happening. And now Trump jumped and supports the direct talk initiative, at which point we're going to see Ukraine either capitulate to Russia and US, and I want to say and US. This is a division of Ukraine between Russia and US. EU will be kicked out of this process. US has already taken its piece from Ukraine. Russia will end up taking their piece from Ukraine. Most likely, Russia will get neutrality from Ukraine with US trade deals inside Ukraine. So that's what's coming along, and we see China supports this initiative, and it looks like there's two choices for Ukraine and Zelensky, either to accept this or go and capitulate on the ground and lose even more land. And we see Trump doing all kinds of deals as he goes to Middle East, to these Arabian countries. He's making deals with China, and he's saying that actually it's easier to make deals with China than with EU. As he says, Trump says European Union is nastier than China, and we see again the same thing from Trump, that it's easier to deal with Russia than Ukraine. It's easier to deal with China than EU. What does this mean? This means a new arrangement in the world, with Trump doing deals with Iran now, with the nuclear talks. Trump is making deals with Hamas and pushing Israel to the side. Like in my last video, I talked about this, how US is now an increasingly more independent actor, because before US policy was coupled with EU and Israel. Now it's decoupling. US is increasingly independent. It doesn't need the approval of EU and Israel to go and do deals, which is good for US and the world. So we're seeing US acting as an independent country and making deals with Iran, Hamas, China, Russia, while the satellite countries are just standing on the side, and possibly they're going against US, but there's not much EU can do right now because EU is crumbling. EU is going to crumble, and if anybody is betting on EU, if anybody is investing on EU and betting against US, you're going to be completely in the dark when things really start happening. So this is the main things that are happening right now with the Russia-Ukraine war. Obviously, we have the Chinese tariffs, where Trump agreed with China to lower the tariffs. Big deal. So we'll see what happens coming up, and there's bigger things coming up as we go on and see how the Russia-Ukraine deal ends up, if Putin will go to Istanbul or if he'll send his helper. It will all depend or on what happens at the end.